Hello and welcome to Releasing Your Inner Dragon, where story creators talk about story creation. Your hosts are Maxwell Alexander Drake, who, in addition to teaching creative writing around the world, is an award-winning novelist and former lead fiction writer for Sony's EverQuest Next. He's also written for other game properties like Shadowrun, written comic books, stage plays, musicals, sold movie scripts, and is currently producing an animated TV show that he's written and directed titled Gods. And Marie Mullaney, author of Songwheel Chronicles and YouTuber of the fantasy world-building channel Just in Time Worlds. We hope you enjoy this episode. Today we are going to discuss immersive storytelling and world-building. Drake?
Or at least a few aspects of it. I mean, it's we could talk for what? 3 years and maybe not even go through all the topics of everything you need to think about. But these two are really cool, you know, both on the writing and prose side, and then on the more immersive world building side. So yeah, I mean, this is obviously, you know, it might be too early for us to be talking about this because there's so many other things that we could talk about ahead of this, you know, time. But the cool thing is that everyone that's watching this or listening to this is going to be at different levels. You know, we're going to have more advanced writers, we're going to have less advanced writers. And so I always say this when I get into the heavier topics, especially when I don't know my audience. You know, I'm at a Comic-Con and there's 600 people in the crowd. The reality is that of those 600 people, a handful are going to be, you know, really advanced writers. A handful are going to be, this is literally their first writing panel or writing class they've ever even sat in on. And then, you know, everybody's going to be in between. So one of the things I always say is, wherever you're at on the journey, it's highly recommended that you go back and listen to this stuff later. I do a local class here in Las Vegas where I do basically, you know, one class a month, and I have kind of a story arc. I start in the beginning, the first couple of months, I'm talking about story theory and structure and thematic elements, stuff like that, a lot of esoteric stuff. Through the summer, we get into hardcore grammar, which is kind of one of the things we're going to be talking about, you know, in this podcast. And then, you know, toward the end of the year, if there's time, we might talk about the business side of it. Like, what is it to actually work in these industries, and what are they looking for, and how do contracts work, and, you know, all these different crazy stuff. But I've got people that have been coming to those classes for 3 years, 4 years, 5 years. You know, it's an official Library City thing, so it's free to the public. But I've got people that are coming year after year after year. And every time they're amazed that they get different things out of this. So this is a great time to kind of say, look, you're going to get a lot out of us talking about this, but 6 months from now, going back and re-listen to this, you will have grown as a writer. And so some of the things that we're going to say, it's just not going to impact. It's not that you're not going to understand it. It's just that you won't have the base knowledge that you'll need for it really to go, oh my goodness, and really flip that wow idea light on in your head. So, you know, coming back to this later, you know, and even 2 or 3 times, you're just going to get different things out of it every time because you're going to grow as a writer. And so that's going to put you in a different level. And it's the same thing, you know, I read 2 or 3 creative writing books every year, you know, books on the craft. And that's the one thing I learned really early in my career. If I read a book and I got a lot out of it, 2, 3 years later, I'd reread the same book. And I would be amazed at how much new information that I would get. And I'd be like, but I read this. Like, why didn't I suck that information in 3 years ago? And it's just, you're not ready yet. Yeah. And so even though this is a little bit more advanced topic, maybe for just the beginning of our podcast thing, it's still something that you can absolutely come back to 6 months from now and listen again, and you'll get stuff out of it.
So why don't you kick us off with writing immersive passages, the passage we were discussing just before we started recording.
So one of the things that upsets some of the attendees of my classes is I harp on the fact that when you start this process, it's a 10-year process. You know, we live in an instant gratification world, and everyone thinks that, oh, I can speak English, so I can definitely be a New York Times bestselling author. None of that is true. Yeah. And I'm not the only one that said this. Every professional writer from the dawn of time have said, you know, a lot of times instead of the 10-year thing, what you hear is you'll hear 1 million words. You have to write and edit 1 million words before you're ready to start writing professionally. And I don't like using that because I mean, a million words, it's sort of like that old adage, you know, if one person is killed, it's a tragedy. If 1,000 person are killed, it's just a statistic. You know, we as humans can't fathom the pain and anguish of 1,000 deaths. And it's the same, I feel the same way with a million words. You know, you got to write a million words. And it's just, okay, that's just so big of a number. It doesn't mean anything to me. So I used to break it down like this. I used to say, now understand what that means. The average novel is about 100,000 words. So what Ray Bradbury and Stephen King and Terry Brooks and all these people are saying is you got to write 10 full novels and throw them all in the garbage before you're ready to write your first novel that's going to be worth anything. And then that's, you know, you bring it down to 10, especially novels, and that makes people go, oh crap, that is a million words. That's, oh wow, that's a lot. Now that you're looking at 10 novels, it takes the average person a year to write and edit a novel. So that's why I'm just like, yeah, 10 years, because 10 years of life is something that really impacts people. They don't like to hear it. But here's the reality. It doesn't take 10 years to learn this stuff. You know, I'm going to talk about being an immersive writer today, and pretty much you'll know everything you need to know, you know, here in the next 30 minutes. Mm-hmm. The problem is that it takes 10 years of constantly practicing it over and over and over to get it to the level that you're skilled at it. Because this is probably, in my opinion, the hardest topic. Mm-hmm. So what I mean by this is, to be an immersive writer, it means understanding that storytelling is not about just giving information to the reader. And I feel like most, not just aspiring writers, a lot of professional writers throughout the time have always done that. They're just like, here's the information. And so what you do is you end up reading the story or watching a movie or whatever, but let's just stick with prose. At the end of the day, you're like, oh, I really like that story. It wasn't necessarily well written. And so that's the difference. And that's really what this is all about. So here's an example. And this is I'm just pulling from my Better Writing Through Stronger Narrative book that I read, available everywhere, tons of information about it. Where literally this is one page of one little section. There's a thing called Make It Personal. And so I'm talking about how to rethink giving information to the reader. So I'm going to start with a passage that I wrote, which is what you'll find in almost every book out there. And this is really kind of the common way. You're just kind of painting a picture and giving information to the reader. So I'm just describing a person. I don't even say if it's a male or female. It's just a person in a backyard. And I'm just describing that. And so I wrote, I stood in my backyard. It was winter, and snow covered the roof of the 2-story home I'd grown up in. The pool had been drained. The trampoline had been placed in storage. A foot of snow sat atop my father's old covered grill. The forest surrounding the house was filled with bare branches. And every time I read that for the first time, everyone's like, well, that's good. That's really good. I can see everything. I can, you know, you've painted the picture. I'm in a backyard. I can see the empty pool. I can see the snow. I can, you know, all of this stuff. Yeah. And you're right. You can see all that, but you can't feel any of it. And not only can you not feel any of it, none of it matters. Yeah. None of it matters to the narrating character. So therefore, it doesn't matter to the reader. So instead, let's say we're writing a story that's dark, that has sadness and is a more morose kind of story, that something horrible has happened. And again, this is an example. I don't even know this story. I didn't write this story. It's just this one example. But I decided to use those thematic elements, those kind of more sad, more, you know, darker kind of thematic elements. So let's say that's the story we're writing. So that's the tone of the story. And we know this character, we know what they're experiencing, and so on and so forth. Instead, if we make it personal to the narrating character and we really push the bounds of that, we might come up with something like this. I stood in the backyard where I'd spent my entire childhood, the pool that housed the pirate battles and sea monster attacks, the trampoline where I'd competed for Olympic gold, the surrounding forest I had spent countless days exploring, pretending it was the deep, dark jungles of Africa, the grill my father used every summer to serve up hamburgers, chicken, and ribs tastier than any I'd had since leaving home. But all that was left now were the memories, cold and empty as the winter gripping the world around me. Snow covered the roof of the 2-story house. Icicles lined its eaves. The pool had been drained, the trampoline placed in storage. A foot of snow sat atop the covered grill. The forest felt as empty and lifeless as my soul.
Yeah.
And so now I did the same thing. You're in a backyard. There's no difference in the information that I gave as far as painting the picture. The difference is because the narrator is telling the story.
Yes.
It's the narrator and how they see the world around me. I don't want the reader to see the world around me, around the narrator. That's worthless to me. I want the reader to experience the world around the narrator through that narrator's perspective and through their life experiences and what they think is important and how they are experiencing this world around them. And it's tough.
Especially in a first person point of view. I mean, in a first person point of view, you really want the reader like right inside there. Because I mean, you're limiting yourself, right? By using first person.
So sort of. So this is where I separate myself from the pack.
Okay.
Let me look this back up. Let me go back to this page.
Because you want the same thing in third person, but in first person, if you don't manage to make the reader feel it, then why are you in first person?
100%. However, me and Brandon Sanderson got into a discussion about this, and he didn't like the way I describe something. You know, he teaches the MFA in creative writing for BYU. He's a brilliant man, a brilliant writer. But he is academic. You know, he comes through academia. You know, he's got an MFA in creative writing, and so he's kind of been taught this certain way, and so he kind of teaches it that certain way. And I think the difference for me and the reason why a lot of people come to me for education on this topic is because I don't have that. You know, I don't have an MFA in creative writing. I don't, have academia, kind of dictating to me how things are. So for me, everything I had to kind of figure it out. And so it's really me looking at things. And so when I'm teaching, and now we're going to slip into point of view, this is a little different. But when I'm teaching point of view, and there's a half a dozen to a dozen different forms of third person. So you can't just say third person because there's, omniscient and limited and objective and free indirect discourse and all these different ones. And I write in true limited. Most people don't. They write, they say they do. That's the term. The reality is that 99.99999% of all third person books that think they're writing in limited is actually writing in something called free indirect discourse. But that term disappeared in the early 90s. Matter of fact, the last book that I know of that was literally labeled as that was Silence of the Lambs back in 1992. And it was the last book that was like, oh, this is written as free indirect discourse.
If that is the final word on the topic, it's one hell of a word. Because but
that's the problem. Everybody is still writing their books like that.
Yeah.
So it's not that you're not writing in free indirect discourse. It's just that I guess limited is just easier to say.
Yeah.
But the problem is you're not writing in true limited, because here's the thing. True limited, if you're writing in true third person limited, it should be written exactly like first person, just using third person pronouns. So I'm going to reread this passage, and this passage is written in first person. It's all eyes. It's what I just read. But watch. I will literally not change one single thing about the sentence structure, the verbs, the tense, nothing. And I'm going to read it in third person, limited. Drake stood in the backyard where he'd spent his entire childhood. The pool that housed the pirate battle and sea monster attacks, the trampoline where he'd competed for Olympic gold, the surrounding forest he had spent countless days exploring, pretending it was the deep, dark jungles of Africa, the grill his father used each summer to serve up hamburgers, chicken, and ribs, tastier than any he had since leaving home. But all that were left now were the memories, cold and empty as the winter gripping the world around him. Snow covered the roof of the two-story house. Icicles lined its eaves. The pool had been drained, the trampoline placed in storage. A foot of snow sat atop the covered grill. The forest seemed as lifeless and as empty as his soul. Literally, if you want to really understand how to write third person limited, you should write it exactly like first person. You should not have, and I'm talking limited. Now, there's other versions of third person, omniscient and everything else. Those are written different. But if you really want to write gripping, limited third person. And here's the thing. And this is where it gets a little, and this is kind of off top. This is not what we discussed. We were going to discuss, but this is actually really, really interesting to me and really, really important to me as a writer. The psychology of the reader who's experiencing it. Mm. And so a lot of people like to write in first person because they go, oh, first person, the most immersive POV that exists, because the reader is inside the character. Yeah. And I'm like, actually, it's not. It's the second most immersive POV. Third person limited is actually the most immersive. And when I say that without explaining it, it was like, no, you're wrong. There's no way. And then I say, follow me on this. So here's the thing. The only difference, if you're writing true third person limited, between the two is the pronoun. That's it. I versus Drake. I, me versus Drake, him, he. That's literally the only difference. And from a psychological standpoint, when you're being told a story where you're constantly reading the word I did this, I did that, to me, it felt like I was doing blah. The reader can get really immersed in it, but you're constantly hitting him with that I. And I is not me. Yeah. I is you. So even though it's really immersive, you still are constantly being, butted up against the I. For some reason, and I don't know why. I'm not a linguistic scientist, so I don't know. I just know that this is how the readers react to it. For some reason, when it's Drake, he, him, or Marie, her, she, you become that character at a deeper level. I don't know why, but you just fall into, if it's written well. Now, the problem with free indirect discourse is, and that's what most people write in, is that you have this ability to be in the character and then 10,000 foot and then in the character and then 10,000 foot and in the character. Since I write in true limited, I never, ever, ever break from the narrating character, ever. You're always in the character. And the negative, I always tell people, don't write that way. Don't follow me down the path of, dying on the hill of I'm only going to write in limited, because it does limit me. Limited is in the title. So let's say, you just read the opening to my current work in progress.
Yeah.
It starts, you're in the narrator's head, the third person narrator's head, and he is locked in a cell. So it starts in the cell. He's never let out of the cell. So the camera's never let out of the cell. Some people come up to the door and talk to him or whatever, but the entire time the camera's in the cell. And so that's very limiting. If I allowed myself to write in free indirect discourse, which is what you should be writing in and what most people write in, with free indirect discourse, it allows you to, and this is another thing that Brandon hates that I say, but in free indirect discourse, you actually have two narrators. You have the character narrator, and then you have an omniscient narrator. The difference is, in true omniscient is a third-party character like Lord of the Rings, where it is a character who's not in the story, who's telling the story.
Yes.
When you're in free indirect discourse, that omniscient narrator can only be a camera. It can only see things, period. It cannot have, and it can also experience smells or sounds or whatever. That's fine too. You could have a magic camera that can smell, whatever.
Yeah.
But what you can't do with that omniscient,
you can't have emotions.
You can't have emotions. You can't have opinions. You can't have thoughts. You can't have, you can't extrapolate, all the things that you can do in omniscient. When you're dealing with free indirect discourse, really all it is for is to allow for the camera to go up. So like in Silence of the Lambs, as an example, the first chapter opens up and we are looking down from about 100, 150 foot on the FBI training grounds. Clarice Sterling is not floating 150 foot in the air looking down at herself, because you also see Clarice Sterling. So in that opening, paragraph or two, you're up floating and looking at everything, including the main character. And then the camera comes down, attaches to her head. You're now in that character's head and in their mindset. And, now you're in limited. And so that's what I mean by being able to go. So like going to the example of the thing you read of the guy in the cell. If I wrote in that, I could actually maybe even start the story. So that takes place in this big city. It's on a bay. I could start the camera out in the bay. I could fly in. I could describe the marina and the docks and the palace and I could describe the city. I could go into. He's actually in a coliseum because he's a gladiator, so I could go and see the outside of the coliseum and swoop down into and maybe even do a pass around it and describe some stuff. I could go into the bowels of the coliseum and look at the prison area and then enter the cell and connect into him and do that whole chapter.
I think that your actual benefit of going with free and direct discourse, in the case of your story, would have been the ability to describe Clane.
Mm-hmm.
Because
that's the other thing.
When I read the first chapter, it bothered me that I did not know. Like, I could form some parts of the picture, but not all parts of the picture because of the limited view.
I cheated in that because I have him go watch memories of himself growing up.
Yeah.
And so now, since the camera's in Clane, that's the character's name, and we're looking at these memories of him, now I can describe him, through that. But you're right, I had to cheat a little bit.
Okay, we've wandered a bit off topic there, but it was very relevant in a way. So let's get back to immersive writing. So I am going to raise one of my pet peeves. I hate encountering English swear words, curse words, and religious expressions in books. I hate encountering...
We're getting off the topic of the actual writing side of it, the what you're doing, the craft.
Now
we're getting into world building.
Yeah. So when I encounter the F-bomb, it annoys me. And I really can't swear with the best of them, but it annoys me in a book. When I encounter damn or bloody, those are expressions from Christianity, bloody being a derivative of the blood of Christ. Now I'm reading it as a curse word in a fantasy book that has no relationship to those words. And it jerks me out of the narrative. I'm just like, I'm done.
Yeah. So like Abercrombie's First Rule series, the F-bomb is thrown in there over and over and over and over and over and literally over again. And I don't 100% agreement on you as far as that is concerned. To me, the F-bomb doesn't scream fantasy. It doesn't scream, and a lot of people do other things. I mean, I love that they use frack in Battlestar Galactica. And that's a sci-fi thing, but still it was, and they're also doing another thing. The FCC will not let you say the F-bomb, but you can say frack. Even though everybody knows you're saying the other word, you're not fooling anybody there, but it's still legal. And so one of it is a legal, standpoint, but the other is it also just gives that, kind of thing. And so that's one of the things is to come up with your own kind of swear words or whatever. But the F-bomb, you're right, it's the same thing for me. But like one of the stories that I wrote for Shadowrun is these drug cartel people, and like the F-bomb is just riddled through that story.
But that's urban fantasy.
It is urban fantasy.
I can buy it.
Right.
I can absolutely buy it.
100%. And so that's the thing is you're trying to, curtail it to that. I do want to play devil's advocate though.
Okay.
So you're right on bloody and damn, being technically from Christian, mythology or Christian terminology or whatever you want to call it. But I have a funny feeling, and I want to say most, and by most, I could be meaning, 80%, 85%, but I'm going to say probably 99% when I say most. I would say most even Christians don't know that bloody is a swear word from their own, that actually developed through that religious, connotation. So I know it bugs you because it's not the first time we've talked about it. But it's one of those things that's kind of become the something that is okay. Like it's changed. It's almost like it's changed definitions, changed where it's come from. And because of the fact that, it's prevalent in a lot of, it's prevalent in a lot of the British, shows where there's like, oh, that bloody, dude, blah, blah, blah. And so it's just, and you're like, well, that guy's not a Christian, or at least he's not acting very Christian-like. So like, it's just become this thing. And since we still put so much of fantasy in that British mindset. So I was auditioning actors for Guards. And when I sent out the audition information, I included samples, you know, because I have this, you know, as the writer and as the director, I've got this thing in my mind of what I'm looking for. And so now I need to find actors who can accomplish what I'm looking for. And so I do say, you know, these two guards are going to have a British kind of accent. Actually, one of the guards, so the old guard I was going to voice, I ended up backing out because I'm having some troubles with my throat. So I backed off of me voicing that. But the voice that I had was more of a, there's no term for it that I know of. There might be one, but it's an Australian Cockney accent. So not a London Cockney. But there's an actor in Australia that I kind of modeled the accent off of, and he was in No Activity. He was actually the older of the two criminals, and I just loved his cadence and kind of his accent and everything like that. But it's not Cockney. It's sort of Cockney, but it's Australian. So it's this, and I just call it this Australian Cockney. So that's what I was doing, and so that's what I've been telling the actor that's now playing that. But for Young Guard, I actually I'm a huge fan of BBC completely. And the, you know, definitely British comedy has affected my comedy writing more than any other aspect, you know, in comedy. But I'm a huge fan of The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and I'm a huge fan of the BBC television adaptation of it.
Yes.
I've never been happy with any of the movies that they've done, but the BBC, and so the actor that played Arthur Dent is the accent that I'm looking for. It is kind of British, but it's more this posh, very subtle British.
Yeah.
And so the actor that ended up getting the part, it was funny in the auditions, because even though I sent links to YouTube videos of that actor voicing Arthur Dent in that show, when he came and started reading the lines, he had this very thick Cockney accent. And I was like, okay, no. That's not what I'm looking for. I'm looking for, and then we, you know, I directed and he nailed it. He literally, and again, that's what a director's job is to see if we can get those actors to deliver what we're trying to do. And so he did nail it and got the part. But it was funny that the go-to, and every actor that was doing this, their go-to was a heck of a lot more heavy British, because they're like, well, it's fantasy. It's fantasy, so it's got to be Cockney. And so I'm like, no. But I did, but even still, both of them still have that. I mean, I'm American, so this is my accent. It's not like I have either of those accents, Australian or British. But as a writer of fantasy, you kind of think about it. It still just kind of has that flair.
But you see, to me, like, it's exactly that is exactly the problem if you're writing the word bloody or damn or any curse word that we use, right? To me, it says that you haven't put enough world building into your story to respect me as a reader. I don't know who you're writing for, and there are people, presumably many people, who are not at all bothered by this. But you don't respect me as a reader, because if you did, you would look at your world building and be like, these are my gods, this is my religion. Swear words comes from religion. So usually, I'm going to make up some curse words tied back to my religion. Or, I mean, that's what I did, right? So my religious iconography is about the wheel. And my whole religious iconography is about it. So when my characters swear, they say, by the wheel, or by the wheel's brass rim, or the wheel's empty hub. Or if they say, I'm damned, they say things like, I'm going to be trodden, as in the wheel's going to tread me, right? Because that's the expressions that would make sense in their iconography and their religion and the whole thing around it. And it annoys me when world builders leave out something that simple.
Because they're just not thinking it through. And then, you know, a lot of swear words are going to come from that, but some don't. I mean, some don't. You know, the stuff that comes out of the back end of all of us. That's going to be, I don't care what fantasy world you're creating, you're probably going to have that there too. And so those words can get used. I don't actually use the S word in my stuff because, again, you know, it's just not. But I do. You know, you pig's dung, whatever. I'll
Dunhead.
throw stuff like that out or whatever, because those are great insults, you know, and then also just animal kingdom in general. Those words can be used as insults. So yeah, it's taking a little bit step further than just what we have. Because you're right, you know, in a fantasy setting, what that does is when you throw in those modern, you know, more modern feeling terms, it does have that chance of breaking, you know, things. However, you're never going to please everybody. I mean, that's the one thing, is you have to understand this is subjective. So if you use bloody, Marie's going to be very mad at you and she's not going to read your stuff. Me, I don't care. That's a word that just doesn't affect me. However, this is one of my favorite stories. In the Genesis saga, for one race, they don't use yes or no. They use nix and I, and that's what they use. And everyone in that culture, that thing uses it. So even if you meet one of them in other cultures, but I know they were raised from that, they still tend to use nix and I, even though they might be in a foreign land or whatever, they're diplomat or they're merchant or whatever reason that they've gone over there. They still have the roots in the culture that they came from. And I like it. I like giving my different cultures, even though, you know, most of the people in the Genesis saga are human. There are other races, but most are human. The 95% of the planet is compromised by humans. It's still, every culture has different ways of doing things. And, you know, I have one island culture, so I pull a lot of seafaring stuff. And even in the descriptions of how they see the world around them, it relates to nautical terms and everything, because they all grow up basically, even if they never leave the island, they're in an island culture. And so seafaring is their number one thing. So pulling their turns of phrases and their curse words and everything like that from those more relevant things. But so I was at, and I actually even remember the convention I was at. I was at the Tucson Festival of Books probably 10 years ago. And this guy came up and he's like, so I read that book. And I was like, and first of all, I've never understood this about humans. So, you know, again, thousands of people come up to me and are like, oh my God, I love this, and whatever. But inevitably, and at almost every convention, or at least the big ones, during the 4 or 5 days of the event, one person will come up to me and go, hey, I read that book. And I go, oh, what did you think of it? And they're like, I didn't like it. And I'm like, so you came out of your way to come over here to tell me you didn't like it? Like, it's just, that's a weird thing to me, as if your opinion is fact.
Yeah.
Like, it's just, what we do is subjective. I run usually a 4.8, 4.7, 4.9 out of 5 stars, which means most people really love what I do. But that also means that, you know, 1 out of 100, 2 out of 100 thinks that I probably make more money picking up cans for a living.
Yeah.
But that doesn't make them right. I still make a really good living as a writer. So it's just weird. But I don't get offended by that. I'm fine with that. And I want to have a discussion, because if it's something that I can do to improve and pick up that without losing, and that's the balance. The balance is fixing it without hurting, you know, the group that you have. So we started to, I was like, well, what is it? He goes, you know, it's really just one word. It was one word that you used that just pissed me off, and I'll never read anything you use again, unless, because you're a great writer. If you didn't use this word, I would like it. And I was like, what one word could make you, because he was like, yeah, I love the characters, I love the story, I'd love to see where it goes, but I'm not going to read book 2 because I can't stand this word. And so in my mind, I'm like, this is blowing my mind, man. What is it? And he's like, you use nix instead of no. And I was like, huh. I'm like, well, I do that because it's a different world. It's a different, I'm showing that it's not our world. You know, it's this other thing and everything like that. And I said, and actually, I've gotten a lot of compliments on like the way I do my language and in world building, because I do want to talk about another thing, because I have a band list too. And you've already brought this up, so, or not in the thing before we start talking about this. So I want to go down that path. But I was like, you know, I've got thousands of people who've commented on the fact that they really do like the fact that I don't just use the traditional, you know, yes and no or whatever. So if I was to get rid of that to please you, the first person and only person who's ever said anything about it, I could lose them.
Yeah.
And he was like, so you're not going to change it? And I just went, nix. Because that's the thing. I mean, you can't please everyone. No. And if he's the one person that I lose, but I enhance the story for thousands of other people, I'm gonna just be, I'm sorry, you're out. You
Yeah.
don't get included in this club because you've chosen that that's the hill you're dying on. And so I'm just not going to go.
If you've enjoyed this episode, you will probably like Marie's YouTube channel, Just in Time Worlds, and Drake's courses on creative writing that he offers through Drake U. So make sure to check those out, and we will be back next week for another episode.